Welcome to the third part of my series on dynamic campaigns. Modeling of military affairs has always been a topic of interest for me. Today's topic brings together Falcon 4 dynamic campaign and real-world modeling of wars. I hope that at the end of this video I manage to show and convince you that Falcon 4 is not simply a flight simulator on top of war game, as sometimes you read in Reddit. The real root of Falcon 4 dynamic campaign is TAC Thunder. So how did I organize this video? First, I will briefly go over what Thunder was and its general features. The manuals of TAC Thunder model are not in public domain, but there are several research documents and theses in public domain writing about modeling some parameter, expanding some aspect, or even benchmarking Thunder versus another model. Some of these documents I have used in this video, and the reference you can find in details of the video or at the end of it. In the second half of this video, then I will compare some aspects I find interesting to the respective ones in Falcon 4. So let's review first what was TAC Thunder. TAC Thunder was a theater level campaign model. It was originally developed for the United States Air Force to model how campaigns would run over several days or even weeks, later used by many other air forces, including the South Korean Air Force. Thunder was capable of simulating several aspects of a complete campaign, ranging, of course, from air and ground combat to generation of missions, logistics, and so on. Thunder did not model the naval warfare. A small spoiler here for the next section, exactly like the dynamic campaign of Falcon 4 original. No naval warfare. Thunder had a stochastic air war. That means combat was based on probabilities as discussed in the last videos. The ground war was deterministic though. Literature sources that I have read cite different models used to simulate the ground warfare. One of them was the United States Army CAM model. Later more about it. Being a giant model to simulate a campaign in the family of models of that time, there was a lot of aggregation in the ground warfare. If you don't know what aggregation means, please take a look on the first video of this series. Most of the sources cite aggregation was at division regiment level. Few cite that Thunder was, though, later expanded to battalion aggregation levels. This remains uncertain for me. The misgeneration of Thunder was at the heart of the air war modeling. I will talk a little bit more about that and how the air task award was generated later. One curious aspect of Thunder and other models of the same era was how the battlefield was simulated. Thunder's battlefield was based on the idea of zones and sectors. These zones would be occupied by aggregated ground units, like the brigades and battalions, which would fight each other back and forward in a kind of piston movement. The idea behind this was a typical scenario found in the late Cold War, which Thunder should simulate. Two forces facing each other, a blue and a red force. For those interested in Cold War, you know this map is a well-known map with different sectors used by NATO forces in the Western Germany. And here are the historical attack plans of the other forces, the other side, with plans to attack the NATO forces. Attack plans from the Czechoslovakia on the left and Poland on the right. You can imagine these piston-like combats with massive front engagements with highly mechanized forces. Finally, the concept of the FLOT, the forward line of on troops, and how it moved back and forward during the ground campaign was a central point to benchmark the parameters used in the Thunder model. Remember, Thunder was an analytical tool to investigate campaign outcomes given certain parameters for weapons or systems, or even order of battles. I could not track exactly when Thunder 1.0 was developed. The earliest mention is in this table in 1987. Just to put in historic context, in 1991 was the first Gulf War, which triggered several enhancements in the basic engine of Thunder. For example, in 1990, there was an enhanced suppression of enemy air defense functions, then the introduction of enhancement of airfield attack mission in 1991, also in the same month year enhancement of air mission planning, and even later in 1996 there are even new algorithms to enhance the flight path generation algorithm to avoid area-sum threats. So Thunder was around and well developed in 97, a couple of years before Falcon 4 was launched. Just to illustrate the name, how the name Thunder was in public domain already in 1985, about 14 years before Falcon 4, is this short passage of an article published in at that time very famous, the so-called Byte magazine, written by the manager of the company developing Thunder and its chief programmer. The article is about how to test large-scale simulations and cites several issues found during development. For example, I read, in running Thunder we found that the air defense aircraft seldom scrambled. Something's wrong with Thunder. A few quick calculations showed that Thunder was doing what it's supposed to do. The problem was one of validation, not verification. The decision rule did not reflect reality. The rule said scramble only if you can reach the Soviet aircraft before they reach their target. Since Soviet fighters attacking the front line would not be detected until they were very near the target, Thunder calculated that the NATO fighters could not reach them in time and did not scramble. There followed a 4-hour discussion of air defenses rules, combat air patrols, and the value of being able to delay making irrevocable commitments until the last minute. As a result, the air defense strategy was redesigned. Since Thunder was an important model of the United States Air Force to model campaigns, it was used to simulate the first Gulf War in 1991, as described in the 1993 by the Gulf War Air Power Survey. Analysis employed the theater-level campaign model TAC Thunder to look at attrition levels for a 10 to 14-day campaign and a 30-day campaign. The results of this work were submitted to the Concepts Analysis Agency as input to a ground warfare model. Some sources cite that Thunder was run in collaboration with the Army CAM model for the ground war. I found it interesting that Thunder predicted 4% attrition for the first day of campaign, well below the observed ones. Also interesting is that some sources cite that Thunder was too crude in its modeling at the end, and a new model called Yadesim, untested at that time, was used, predicting nevertheless very similar, very high numbers. Here on the right you can see one of the few screenshots of the interface of this new model. Thunder screenshots I could not find. Let me zoom in a little bit. This one here on the left shows several interesting stuff like the position of different SAM batteries and SA2 and SA6 as one SAM operations center for the CARI, the Integrated Air Defense System of Iraq at that time. On the right is another screenshot of the Gulf War with tanker tracks, air bases, and carriers. These tanker tracks were mainly used by the F-117 stealth fighter, the Nighthawk, while the tanker tracks here coming from the Red Sea were used mainly by the naval aircraft. So enough about TAC Thunder historic aspects. Let's dive in on its details and compare to Falcon 4. Here's an overview how the air planning in Thunder was structured. Aircraft and mission allocation. A prioritized target list was created based on a target list coming from different sources and combined with operations concept. The mission assignment, the second part in this graph, took into account the mission effectiveness of each squadron aircraft and how many sorties were available. That means how many aircraft could join this mission, and the apportionment of aircraft by mission. Pay attention to the wording of this official public presentation dated 1996: priority, effectiveness, and apportionment. We're going to need that in a few slides. Building the final ATO is a very complicated affair. It's not straightforward to allocate the correct number of aircraft to a given mission and target when several parameters are considered. It's an optimization problem. So in general, one can define a so-called objective function, which can be, for example, the maximization or minimization of some numerical value, like the destruction of enemy assets, to minimize our losses or to maximize any other value. The original Falcon 4 was designed by using priorities. That means potential missions were ordered by using the notion of priority as discussed in my video about campaign priorities. See the link here. This is not effective, but is very fast. F4 does that the whole time during the dynamic campaign. Thunder, on the other hand, using a much more time-consuming but potentially optimal way of mission allocation. It solved the problem as a transportation linear programming problem. It used a hard-coded mission percentage, not priorities, important to note, and select the most effective aircraft for a given type of mission. I think it's important to understand the difference here is that the ATO in Thunder, as far as the open sources discussed that, was not calculated in real time. So the model had plenty of time to calculate before the simulation started. Falcon 4 air tasking order, on the other hand, is calculated in real time during our use of the simulation and cannot afford to use too much CPU for this task. So the next point, campaign objectives are very similar how they are selected in Thunder as well as in Falcon 4. Both use the notion of target priority, but differ on the mission aspect. Thunder use mission percentage and Falcon 4 use the notion of priority. So in this next slide you can see what I mean by mission percentage. This is an extract of the air allocation file of Thunder on the left side. The missions were grouped in different groups: air superiority, deep strike, and the mission allocation in percentage inside each group was hard-coded for a given time frame. Each group here corresponds to the main role of an aircraft: air superiority, main role aircraft, deep strike, and so on. For example, aircraft tagged with air superiority role would be allocated with 25% for this time slot in each kind of these four missions here. And this, what in Thunder, would change in another time slot. For later times, different allocations would be used. I mean, it's a very interesting way of implementing aircraft usage. Now comes Falcon 4. It seems Falcon planned to use a very similar idea, but implementation was never finished. These files are in the campaign directory since Falcon 4 original, if I remember correctly. They define how the mission priority would change depending on the strategic situation. It looks like each mission has a priority, and that would change depending on the file being used. For example, when we are on offensive, then the offense.pre file would be used with these priorities. If you are on defensive, then other priorities would be used. What I think is more curious is that it seems that priority was not necessarily planned as a parameter for mission allocation. In the mission dat file, there is a flag present since I know the original code, but not in use in Falcon 4. Call it don't restrict percentage of missions flow, which sounds that percentage was somehow planned to be used, but at some point was dumped and priorities were used instead. So next point, target prioritization is possible in both models, Thunder and Falcon 4. This can be done manually or automatically in both cases. Falcon 4, as you know, you can do that manually via sliders and or via triggers, for example. In Thunder is for me unknown how it was manually or automatically done. This algorithm is not discussed nowhere. Finally, both algorithms, Thunder and Falcon, both create packages, as you know, and both use seed and scored fragging for the package. Both also take into account the distance flow into the enemy territory for the composition of the package. Another very interesting parallel between Thunder and Falcon 4 is the mission parameters. Here on the left is the data from Thunder for an F-16 aircraft, and here for a squadron of F-16. On the right for a flight and a squadron in Falcon 4. They use the same values. Falcon 4 labels its mission group in scores in percentage. For example, air-to-air missions are grouped under the CAP tag in Falcon, and here for an F-16 it has a score of 50%. Thunder labels the effectiveness from 0 to 100 in percentage also, and give values in that scale for each one of the missions instead of the row. Other names, same effect as in Falcon. I think it's very interesting both the similarity between both approaches. So let's take a look finally on other small but very curious similarities between both models. On the top, Thunder and Falcon used pre-calculated values for detection ranges for different types of targets. Both of them use the same approach. Second, in the middle line, both had in the code a flag to launch enemy intercept mission versus a friendly mission. On the left you can see the 10% probability for Thunder, and Falcon 4 had the flag 12 in the mission data, doing more or less the same thing. I think personally that was a way, sounds like a hack, to frag an intercept mission, enemy intercept mission, without going into complicated simulation of ray detection, cure rate times, etc. And finally on the bottom, something that puzzled me for a long time was why we had in the original Falcon 4 two bar caps. Bar cap 2 is the DCA mission Falcon. Bar cap without any number had a comment in the code which said bar cap missions to protect target area. This is very strange because a bar cap mission to protect target area is called, as far as I know, tar cap mission, a target combat air patrol. So when I figured out that Thunder also had two kind of DCA missions, a normal DCA, Falcon's bar cap 2, and a ODCA, which was defined as an overflight defensive counter-air, ODCA. Aircraft sit on the ground and wait for a certain type and size enemy flight to take off. And an ODCA aircraft then flies up to a user-defined distance into enemy territory to attack the flight. Very complicated, never heard about that. Nevertheless, when I read that the first time, I could only laugh. Kind of, oh, now I understand why Falcon's like that. Someone wants to implement the same idea in Falcon, but never managed to do so. So bar cap, Army's bar cap was never really implemented in Falcon, and so up today. So let's talk then about the final interesting aspect of Falcon, the maps. I never really got why Falcon 4 had the PAC system. I asked myself if it was an idea based on the packs or the package of the Vietnam War, the package 6A, 6B, 5, 3, 4, 2, 1, or it was something else. It was also too small for that, and they also did not follow the province-state structure of South Korea. So I already showed you that Thunder used that sector zone structure. Unfortunately, I never managed to get my hands on an official map of Thunder, but I managed to find a map of another model of that time called TAC War, developed before Thunder, but which used a very similar division sectors, as you can see here in the middle. Then I start comparing the packs and the sectors and start drawing some, lines and comparing what I see in between the TAC War map and Falcon 4. And the similarity between some of the borders was striking for me too. My guess, someone had the idea of using a similar map, but then figured out that they are not supposed to use the same sector model. Then they start doing these very strange back traces borders that you see nowadays in Falcon 4. Okay, well, I think I have shown enough similar points between both implementations. Falcon 4 has indeed, in my opinion, a lot of points in common to the TAC Thunder model. So the question is, of course, now, how did that happen? How can that be? So the legend goes that the campaign designer had his first job and he developed everything from scratch. The Kevin Klemnick. There is an interview of 1998 by Jim and Louis on Combat Sims, which said the following. So what we did was we had one programmer, Kevin Klemnick, who is the leading engineer on the entire campaign side. He hates flight sims with passion. Amazing, yeah. Even though he grew up around airplanes and his dad has a plane and he used to fly with him, he likes strategy games. He was the perfect guy. We did not want a guy who loves flight sims. Of course, we don't want this kind of guy for Falcon 4. We want a guy who loves strategy games. It sounds a very fairy tale, isn't it? Someone that has never done anything similar. A new guy on a new job, used to fly with his dad, hates flight sims, and I'm going to be very sincere to you. I played hundreds of strategy games and board games, computer and so on, and I would never come to the idea of making the campaign of Falcon that way, so similar to TAC Thunder. So after reading dozens of documents on Thunder and other campaign engines, studying Falcon 4 code, seeing also dozens of similar ideas and implementations, I simply could not buy this story. So I started doing my research. And I'm looking at what is the connection between Falcon 4 and the United States Air Force in the end of the 90s. And I found something that, as far as I know, is unknown to the flight sim community. So Mr. Klemnick gave an interview to a research project completely unrelated to dynamic campaigns or Falcon 4 in 2002, it looks like. The project was about modeling of terrorist behavior, year 2002, as you can read. 3 years after Falcon came to life, he was in a new job. So, the summary of his interview, there is the following entry, as you can see here on the right. So they use neural networks occasionally. Sometimes AI is used more in the context of simple learning, blah, blah, blah. So, but what's interesting is what I marked here, and it's here zoom in. Klemnick worked on Falcon. Okay, flight simulator, we know that. He modeled an entire war. Yeah, we know that. Missions developed based on many inputs. Okay, so far so good. Now comes. To do this, he went to the military and copied their process for decision making in similar scenarios. He then modeled this. Haha. So that was exactly the missing link. I think this is simply amazing because this is a completely another era that we live today. It's before one could simply type in Google and search any document. We are talking about 1996 or maybe 1997. He went to the military and asked for the documents or discuss with details and so on, and Falcon 4 has so many things similar to TAC Thunder. So, in my opinion, based on what I show you, Falcon's campaign is not simply a board game with a flight simulator on top of it, as people used to say. it was from the beginning on designed heavily and inspired on concepts present in real-world campaign engines, and in particular what I showed the United States Air Force Thunder model. So if you guys want to dive in also in the reference, here are they, but they also below in the video detail. And as a final comment, I have decided to add an additional part to my series. I think it would be very interesting, at least for me, to discuss how the different types of algorithms work and what is the implementation and so on when we talk about air tasking order models. So next topic is going to be building an air tasking order. See you next time. Bye bye, guys.